Welcome back. We did invite Time Magazine Detroit correspondent Stephen Gray to be on this program, but he's not here. So we'll move ahead with our round table. Ron Scott, Detroit political historian, and WDET Detroit NPR's Noah Oshinsky. Thank you very much for coming on center stage.
Thanks, Bankley.
Yeah. Let me begin with Noah. What's your take? You read the Time Magazine piece. Yeah. Give us your take as a journalist who covers the city.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a media critic, I have to say. So let me put that out there.
Sure.
And of course, Time is still early in their 1-year tenure here in Detroit. But from what I've read, I think it's admirable that they're doing what they're doing. I think so far, based on what I've read, much of the material has reflected the familiar narrative that has come to sort of define coverage, national coverage of Detroit.
Ron Scott.
Well, let me say this, Bankley. I don't want to disagree with you too much, but you did define me as a historian. I am a journalist. In addition to that, and what worked with Vernon Jarrett, and was one of the members that helped to found the National Association of Black Journalists, too. So, having said that, Coleman Young was like the third in the succession of African-American mayors. The first was Richard Hatcher. The second was Carl Stokes in Cleveland, and then Coleman Young.
Which is Chuck Stokes, XYZ,
right,
Chuck Stokes'
that's
uncle.
Right, that's his uncle. And I have to say that in defining Motown, or No Town as they referred it to, I have to agree with Noah. It was more of the base non-accuracy that was defined in your editorial that reflects a retreat from journalistic accuracy, and also it emphasizes just and he uses the term hubris here, the hubris, in effect, that is being spewed on Detroit. And furthermore, one of the things that really bothered me, having lived in that period, about Coleman Young, that Coleman Young was spending his time looking for retribution. I said, retribution against who? The first three people he worked with were Max Fisher, 4 people, Max Fisher, Henry Ford, the second, and Al Taubman. 2 individuals, 2 Jewish individuals and an Anglo-Saxon and an African-American helped to shape the city and try to piece it together and keep it together during that period. Coleman Young personally kept the city of Detroit from being involved in a civil war, given the fact that the police were killing people with the old stress unit. And Coleman Young, nobody had anything close to his stature. I worked with him in that. Helped to keep the city together at a time when, in effect, it could have very easily exploded into direct confrontation.
And Noah, you know, one of the things that I've said is that I think as journalists we have a responsibility to not only report the facts, but also provide a balanced perspective. I mean, these narratives that you talked about, I mean, yes, I mean, when you look around, there are remnants of that, there are relics of those narratives, but on the other side, there are other stories.
Absolutely.
That show, you know...
Again, these are journalists that are writing for a national audience. They may not be the stories that you and I would write, but they're the stories that they're writing for the nation. And we see the Packard plant as, I think, safe to say, an old metaphor for Detroit's, you know, supposed decline. To a national audience, the decline of the Packard plant and the train station is striking. But for those of us who live in Detroit or who work in Detroit, I think those are tired images.
Yes.
And I think it's time to, if Time and other journalists are going to spend extended amount of time here, I think they need to move beyond those images, because I can think of a lot of other images right now that really describe, I think, you know, the upward momentum that Detroit has.
And I have to say, first of all, it's Packard plant. These 2 guys, I met them. I talked to them. These are 2 guys who have become born-again Christians. They moved to Detroit. One guy's from California, was part of the punk rock movement, and virtually every musical movement that you can think of on the planet started in Detroit. And these guys have started a metal fabrication business inside here. They were upset because they said nobody went inside to see what they were doing to try to rehab and redistribute the wealth. Furthermore, I think the images, just like Noel says, we ought to go to the neighborhoods like, you know, the West Side over on at Grandmont subdivision. We ought to go to some of these other neighborhoods, which and you've lived in D.C. and other places. There are neighborhoods that people would die for to live here, and there are people who are working every day, the urban farming movement, all of that kind of stuff. People have harvested over 200,000 bushels of food here in Detroit. So, I mean, you know, you're not showing that kind of neighborhood and those kinds of situations that exist that reflect the rebirth, if you choose, of Detroit.
I mean, in the shadow of the train station is Southwest Detroit, which I think by all accounts, for many people, is a thriving community. I mean, in the shadow of the train station is Slow's Barbecue, which, whether or not you like barbecue,
that sounds like,
you know, I mean, that's a restaurant that is.
I like that term. In the shadow of the train station, we have this.
This restaurant that is like, I don't know about you, but every time I drive by, it's packed.
Well, and he's, he's committed to Detroit. This guy moved here.
Let's go on a quick break. When we come back, in fact, our roundtable will give their own. Suggest or give their own lessons to what these national journalists ought to be covering, and if they are really dedicated to the memory of responsible, well, Joseph Pulitzer and responsible journalism. We'll be right back.